According to Assosicted Press Belarusian authorities said on Tuesday that Belarus is ready to resume cross-border traffic with Ukraine soon. On the Belarusian side, all checkpoints that are located on the border with Ukraine are functioning. Service is being carried out at them. Border guards are fully prepared to resume international communication with the neighboring side in the shortest possible time, Press Secretary of the Belarusian State Border Committee, Anton Bychkovsky, said at the crossing on Tuesday. Journalists were invited to visit the Novaya Guta checkpoint in the southeastern region of Gomel, that used to be one of the biggest checkpoints between the two countries with routes towards Kiev, Chernihiv and other Ukrainian cities. Ukraine closed all its checkpoints on the border with Belarus after the conflict started in February 2022. Both countries have built fortifications on their sides and strengthened security measures. Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko, who extended his more than three-decade rule in an orchestrated election on Sunday, allowed Moscow to use the country's territory to start the conflict in Ukraine in 2022 and later hosted some of Russia's tactical nuclear weapons. Lukashenko has been in power since 1994 and has ruled the country with an iron fist. He has relied on subsidies and political support from Russian President Vladimir Putin, himself in office for a quarter century, a relationship that helped him survive the 2020 protests.
Ну, мы все прекрасно понимаем, что те риски, вызовы и угрозы, которые исходят с территории государства, которое воюет, необходимо учитывать в планах обороны нашего государства. И мы это, безусловно, делаем. Поэтому территория приграничья была оборудована соответствующим образом. С белорусской стороны все пункты пропуска, которые находятся на границе с Украиной, функционируют. В них осуществляется служба. Пограничники в полном объеме готовы в самые кратчайшие сроки возобновить международное сообщение с сопредельной стороной. Хватило информации вовремя выявить нарушителя и предупредить. Что я так же хочу.
After the start of the all-out war against Ukraine in 2022, Russia's economy exceeded expectations. While the results are far from stellar, they are not catastrophic. CNN reports. Last year, the Russian wartime economy likely grew faster than the economies of the US and key European nations. Unemployment hit a record low, and the increase in defense spending, though temporarily squeezing other areas, did not spiral out of control. Elena Rybakova, a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, notes that these figures send a dual message to the Russian public. We're still standing. To Ukraine's allies, we can outlast you. We can outlast you. However, experts caution that this image of economic resilience is an illusion. The Kremlin carefully maintains the facade of a stable economy to influence its adversaries. As the war approaches its third anniversary, this mask is beginning to slip. Some analysts describe the situation as an economy on steroids. While the growth may appear rapid, it is artificial and unsustainable. Steroids is a good one, but it still produces some muscle. I wouldn't call this muscle, it's more like running around on cocaine, said Rybakova. The Kremlin also employs a strategy of reflexive control to shape the adversary's perceptions. For instance, Moscow has tried to convince the West that its economic strength can fund the war for years, nudging Ukraine's allies toward compromises that align with Kremlin goals. Alexandra Prokopenko, a fellow at the Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center, argues that economic growth and low unemployment have become key points in Putin's rhetoric. However, the reality is far less optimistic. Craig Kennedy, an associate at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard University, says the Kremlin hides the true cost of the war through shadow financing mechanisms. His research reveals that the government compelled banks to issue subsidized loans to companies linked to military contracts. From mid-2022 to the end of 2024, private lending grew by 71%, equivalent to 19.4% of Russia's GDP. Around 60% of these loans, up to $249 billion, supported military enterprises. This scheme risks triggering a financial crisis as a wave of toxic debt accumulates, potentially collapsing the banking system when war-related companies begin defaulting. Even without a credit crisis, Russia faces significant economic challenges. The IMF forecasts GDP growth to slow to 1.4% in 2025, following a 3.8% rise in 2024. Inflation has already reached 9.5% in 2024, up from 7.4% in 2023. Some supermarkets have even locked basic goods in cabinets to combat rising theft. Labour market issues are also creating strain. Despite a low unemployment rate, 2.3%, a shortage of skilled workers is forcing companies to raise wages, adding to inflationary pressures. Prokopenko warns that Moscow cannot continue funding both the war and the regular economy while maintaining broader economic stability. Russian forces unleashed a relentless wave of mechanized assaults, aiming to finally achieve a decisive breakthrough in the Ukrainian western flank. However, Ukrainians turned the pre-existing Russian defenses in Kursk against them, unleashing a barrage of drones and ATGMs as the Russian columns tried desperately to move forward, according to Euromaidan press media outlet. It is noted that the goal of the Russian forces in this area is to take control of the village of Malaya Lokhnya. This would allow the Russians to successfully isolate the Ukrainian forces in the northern part of the Kursk salient and cut off Ukrainian ground lines of communication with their main logistics hub in Sudza. To accomplish this, Russian commanders employed large assault formations, deploying 4 waves of platoon-sized mechanized units, each with 3 to 4 armored vehicles supported by tanks. These units aimed to cross from their positions in the village of Novoivanovka as quickly as possible to secure the village of Viktorovka and reach the doorstep of Malaya Lokhnya. Euromaidan press says that the main advantage of Russian forces lay in the speed and firepower of their mechanized assault units compared to human waves of infantry, minimizing the exposure to Ukrainian precision fire. However, these advantages were heavily undermined by the terrain configuration, the weather, and even their own equipment. Learning from previously failed mechanized assaults due to Ukrainian landmines, Russians used mine crawlers on the lead tanks. This forced them to advance over the fields at an incredibly slow pace so that the demining equipment could do its work properly, making them easy targets for Ukrainian strike and reconnaissance drones. To make matters worse, old Russian dragon-tooth fortifications from before the Ukrainian Kursk incursion remain, heavily restricting Russian movement during their assault. Additionally, slightly warmer temperatures have melted the snow and soaked the fields, further slowing down Russian armored columns. Craters from prior Russian airstrikes have completely flooded, forcing Russian units into predictable choke points. The combination of mud, dragon teeth, and exposed terrain enabled Ukrainian forces to effectively target and destroy these Russian assaults through all available means. Combat footage from the area reveals how the Ukrainian defenders effectively engaged a Russian assault platoon consisting of 3 infantry fighting vehicles and 1 tank. The column moved across the field from Novaya Guta to Viktorovka, maneuvering around the Dragon's Teeth and flooded bomb craters, according to Euromaidan Press. The hindered movement of the first Russian assault allowed Ukrainians to completely dismantle it already on the approaches with FPV kamikaze drone strikes and artillery. However, some vehicles from the second wave of mechanized assaults managed to approach and enter the village of Viktorovka, but quickly found themselves targeted by Ukrainian anti-tank teams sporting Javelin anti-tank guided missile launchers. As their armor stood no chance against the modern weapon systems, Russian soldiers were forced to scatter across the fields and village in disorganization, where they were systematically hunted down by Ukrainian drone operators dropping grenades from above.